Those Space People, a podcast series of casual cosmic conversations with people working on exciting space projects. Today we have Vinayak Vadlamani with us. Vinayak is currently the chief engineer at Redwire Space, and he's currently based in Luxembourg. Redwire Space is in Luxembourg, designs and develops robotic arms for satellite servicing and refueling, in space manufacturing, debris capture, and so on. And Vinayak has a background in systems engineering. So, Vinayak, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
As a chief engineer, what's your current role at Redwire Space?
So, chief engineer is it's a very recent recent role function that I've taken on, but it means technical assurance for and the final decision, key decision making on all matters technical within a project and related to technical program or such matters. In simple words. But I come from a systems engineering background, as you mentioned. So I was not really keen on this title, but uh, my management and the faith of the team said that I have enough experience to pull off such a title right now. So, but yeah, what I do is basically make sure that our reviews, our customers. I still am a lead systems engineer. I also carry that function. But in addition, I make sure that the key technologies that are involved in the products we make are matured properly and tested properly to be sent for qualification and for missions.
Okay, wow. Yeah, I mean, I think in the space industry, the titles and everything is not very standardized, right? Right, like everything else, nothing is really set as a template in the space industry. So, if your team believes you can pull it off, of course, you can pull it off. Yeah. So, you started with a systems engineer, and then you were a systems lead. So, I'm a bit curious: how do the responsibilities keep evolving as you progress in the systems engineering path?
I think it really depends on where you are, what kind of a technical discipline you are in as a systems engineer. Most spacecraft systems engineers usually start from a subsystem or work on a variety of subsystems. So I started like that. I was a GNC systems engineer first. And I think my career path, 10 years ago when I was at Team Indus, the former Google Lunar Express team, I started as a GNC systems engineer and then evolved to a lunar lander systems engineer. So I had an overview of all different subsystems like structures, propulsion, communications, OBC, onboard computing, etc. And I think the more time you spend on knowing all systems, the better systems engineer you can be. Um, and there's also the added um perspective of looking at things from a high level perspective. I think which makes systems engineers very prone to management. So, and some systems engineers really like that. I don't mind it at all, but I think if you are a systems engineer and if you wish to enforce your requirements well, I think you also need some authority in the team to be able to pull that off. So yeah, I think that's the evolution of a general systems engineer. But then there's some people who are better at requirements definition, requirements management, and especially the scientific or payload side of the community. You can never be a systems engineer, good systems engineer, and know a payload inside out. So I think you need somebody on the uh, instrument side as well to know it. And I think that's a fine line where you tread a path of being a subsystem manager or a systems engineer.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you mentioned You started off as a GNC systems engineer, right? What is the difference between a GNC engineer as a development engineer, or a non-systems GNC engineer versus a GNC systems engineer?
Yeah, that's a great question. A GNC systems engineer or like a subsystem engineer will have very specific role to develop the subsystem requirements of that team. So I think, as you know, as a program begins, you have high level system requirements, and then you have derived requirements at the subsystem level. So if you call the system level as level zero, then the subsystem requirements would be level one. And usually the chief systems or lead systems engineer would give you level one requirements, but then somebody from that subsystem will need to write their own derived requirements, which would be level two or level three requirements. And these are the requirements that usually get verified or tested. So that's what a GNC systems engineer would do, a lower level systems engineer would do. So write those requirements and then define them and explain how they will be tested and verified.
Okay, that's yeah, that's pretty interesting. But I can totally see. I mean, as also someone working in a company that builds space hardware, there's always this. I wouldn't say rift. There is this challenging conversations between systems engineers and the other engineers. So yeah, it's always nice to know what's going on in the head of a systems engineer. You've been in Luxembourg, at least you've been with Redwire Luxembourg for the past 4 or 5 years. What's currently happening in the Luxembourg space scene? How does the Luxembourg Space Agency engage with, I believe there's about 50 or 60 space related companies and labs and startups and other entities. So, how does the space agency engage with all these?
Yeah, I think Luxembourg has the I think the advantage of being very agile. The space ecosystem is very young and fastly growing. So Luxembourg Space Agency will be celebrating their fifth anniversary this year. It, and there's a Summer Space Festival also, which coincides with that, which some of our teammates are organizing this year in Luxembourg, this edition. So, just on a side note, a small plug, but LSA, as they're called, it's basically a small organization of administrators, and we, as Redwire Space Europe, have a program liaison. So somebody who oversees the growth and who manages a project, and they have a ESA attaché as well. So there's a ESA point of contact, a bridge between ESA and LSA, and then on the ESA side, which is where I usually work with, we have a technical director or our a technical point of contact. So we normally we I don't in my day to day function don't directly interface with LSA, but my boss does, who is Yaroslav Yavorski, and he's the general manager of Redwire Space Europe. And currently, LSA provides us direct funding for a program, which is a Lux Impulse, which falls under Lux Impulse program, which is the flagship program of LSA that has about, I think, 25 odd programs running in Luxembourg. Other notables being iSpace Europe, Hydrosat, and many others. So that's, I think, briefly how I would describe what LSA does and how they keep it up. I think there's still a lot of other programs that they run, but I'm only familiar with Lux Impulse, which is their flagship program.
Yeah, it always seems amazing, especially countries with newly established space agencies or these kind of space entities from the government side. Even if we compare Australia, for example, or Luxembourg, they kind of directly leapfrog, right? They don't have this baggage of traditional space agencies of trying to bring in the industry and trying to engage and kind of not play the regulator and a participant at the same time. So yeah, I think it's a pretty amazing what these the countries with newly formed space agencies do, and how much they can accomplish, which is pretty awesome. So how easy or difficult was the process to get a work permit in Luxembourg for you as a non EU citizen?
Yeah, that's a good question too. Actually, it was not that difficult. Um, so I think, given my timing, which was pre-COVID, those were simpler times. Um, but it's a very straightforward process. But it involves initially sending paperwork to the Ministry of Interior Immigration Affairs, which is located in Luxembourg City. So you send all your paperwork first up, and then you receive this document, which is temporary authorization to work. And this, along with two other documents, is all you need to apply for a Type D visa, which is a short-term, 90-day visa for entry. And once you arrive, you convert it into a permanent work permit. So it's basically both the residence permit and the work permit that then gets renewed every year, basically.
Okay. Does this set you on a path of permanent residency or citizenship, or how does that progress?
Yeah, I think with any European nation, there are certain rules of minimum amount of residency, stay in that country, your how you pay your taxes, how you conduct yourself. And I think this it's similar to Germany in that I think you need 5 years overall in your residency, and then I think there is a path to permanent residency as well as citizenship. I think both, depending on what you're looking for. There is also a blue card scheme, which is very popular, especially in Luxembourg. And especially if you're from India, a lot of people would ask you if you have a blue card because Amazon is the biggest employer of people from our country in Luxembourg. So I think the Big Four, Luxembourg is also home to the Big Four, the finance giants, and they've made many foreign workers aware that there is a blue card. And I think if you meet the blue card requirements, it also aids in your permanent residency. And the blue card is valid for 4 years on your first approval.
Yeah, looks like it's quite similar to as in Europe or Netherlands or a bunch of other European countries as well. So in Germany as well, if you're on a blue card, then it's a faster path to permanent residence. So you,
Exactly.
depending on the language, yeah, so long as you satisfy the language requirements and have the certifications, it's either 21 months or 33 months. And yeah, and also Germany is trying to bring this new citizenship law, which decreases the amount of time you spent in Germany from 8 years to 5 years to qualify for citizenship. So hopefully, I guess next year. Yeah, next year, I guess. Yeah, I guess in the Netherlands, for example, they already have this 5 year limit, 5 year period. However, does it really matter if you are an EU national or a Luxembourg national? Has it ever been an issue for you to find opportunities or to progress in your career as well in Luxembourg?
You mean as a third country national in Luxembourg?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
No, not really. I've been very lucky to be with a company like Redwire Space Europe, formerly called Made in Space Europe. So it was as with somehow in my past, I've always been the fourth guy to be hired in these space startups. So no, not really. And I think even in Europe, otherwise, I think it's been a pleasant experience. I had previously been to Europe when I was working in India as well, and I think that was too short of a stay. But I worked with both American and European partners. We were buying some sensors from Germany, for example, and I think that versus how I'm working right now, I didn't see a difference. Um, I think within the past 3 years, I would say that it's definitely become much more international. For example, our company has people, about 30 odd people, and the number of nationalities, if you may guess, how many nationalities do you think we have?
Well, it's similar at my company as well. So, and the fact that you're actually asking me explicitly, maybe 10 to 15, I guess.
Yeah, it's actually 22.
Oh wow.
So it's really diverse, and I think that's what's great about Luxembourg is that, or a company in Europe is that there's no ITAR regulations. There's no security clearance unless you're working on a classified project, of course, which then you would follow rules. No, but it's a great opportunity for people from Africa, India, um, other parts of Europe. Yeah. So no, I think to answer your question, it's not been difficult. It's been advantageous rather. So
Yeah, yeah. I guess it's not just Africa countries with not as much, private space activity, but even, for example, in my company, we also have a couple of people from the US and Canada, where the space activity is much more established and much more, more of a happening place. So it's always really nice. I guess Europe is probably the only place in the world where you can work with truly multinational teams, multicultural teams in the space sector. So yeah, absolutely, it's good to know that it's the same with Luxembourg. Even as far as I've seen, the most stringent requirement perhaps I have seen is more than the nationality. Is, for example, if you're in a sales role, or if you're talking to a lot of local suppliers, then it's mostly the language requirements. But otherwise, yeah, it's also something very similar to what I've observed. So nice to know. And so, yeah, circling back a little bit to the systems engineering and talking about it, what kind of skill sets are needed to get into space systems engineering, right? Because you've right after your undergrad, you've gotten into Axiom Space, or Team Indus, the finalist of the Google Lunar X Prize, like you mentioned, and you jumped into the role of a GNC systems engineer. So, is there what kind of skill set do you need to be? Because at the end of the day, even though you're part of the subsystem, you still have the systems engineering mindset. So, what kind of skill set is really needed?
yeah, I think it's. I think because of where we fell, and Axiom being one of the earliest private space companies, except for I think only True Space existed before that, which was really commercial, and kudos to them for the latest round. I think they're doing awesome. Um, the skill set is very simple. I think you need a general understanding of how space systems work, some degree of education or some courses in maybe general space dynamics, environmental conditions, calculating, orbital periods. But I think apart from that, I think you don't need a very specific set of technical skills, but you need rather a technical engineering mindset to become a systems engineer. And some of the best systems engineers are software systems engineers, and you're from a software background, so you know how much systems engineering is involved in that. But how systems engineering is defined today and the history of systems engineering comes from DARPA. Again, they had a huge role, as with everything in space, and they literally wrote the first book on principles of how to organize or abstract systems into different groups or block diagrams. And NASA later on, I think, went on to write something on systems engineering, which is called uh, the NASA Systems Engineering Handbook, which is SP 7005, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah,
My memory
that's
fails me, which is where I learned my systems engineering from, which was not a great place to start because you will be bombarded with terms and
too much of information. And
yeah. Uh, but I think in hindsight, I think an organization like DARPA or NASA can only get you up to a certain point in your career. I think as a systems engineer, you need to work with all subsystems, understand what they do, what their constraints are, and nothing like getting your hands dirty in a project. So, be it like a student satellite project or, you know, a CANSAT, a ERC, European Robot Challenge, anything which has two or three different systems coming together and making something integrated, uh, which is of more than a certain amount of complexity for a centralized system to handle. I don't know if I made it sound too complex, but it's something like that. And I think you can be an excellent systems engineer if you have simplified tools. You don't even need famous, systems engineering requirements writing tools. All you need is maybe a handbook just to refer to. I think in Cozy is a great organization. I am a member, so I think you talk to other systems engineers also. You learn a lot. Um, the best thing would be to start under somebody who knows systems engineering or consult someone as as we did back in our day. So we had very good guidance from, of course, senior ex-industry experts as well as people in the commercial sector. And I think then you can add on your own on top of that. But I can leave you with a couple of links. I think they're great places for somebody who's looking to start out in this field.
yeah, absolutely. I would definitely add it to the description of the podcast episode. But what's this organization that you mentioned, In Cozy? Is it In Cozy? Can you talk about that?
Sure. Yeah. INCOSI is basically the International Council on Systems Engineering. So INCOSE. It was founded not so long ago in 1990, I think, and they also have certification, so they're known for that. And there's a few. They also have a handbook that they release, which is written by the community of systems engineers. And I think that gives a lot of clarity on how to write requirements. But they don't work only in the space sector; they work across disciplines. And I think a good systems engineer is one who's worked on different sectors. And so I also actually learned about them when I was working in GE, when I was not doing a space project. Um, and it was fascinating because up till that point of time, my systems engineering perspective was very space oriented or aeronautics oriented. And then I came to know a lot from the software background because I was writing software. And yeah, they are a fine organization. They are very actively engaging on LinkedIn and I think other platforms. And they also have a membership um, for people from developing nations, I think, which is fairly lower than the standard rate. So, if you, in case somebody is interested to become a member, volunteer, and they do these working groups where I think 10 or 20 working groups, some on requirements definition, some on verification and validation. And systems engineering as a discipline is very detail oriented. So they've sort of made active working groups like IEEE on each one of them. And yeah, it's very similar organization to as you'd see in IEEE, but more volunteer based, definitely, and less publications. I don't think you'll see any big systems engineering publications or research by them, but they're very practical and outward facing, I would say, in the kind of discussions they do.
That's pretty awesome. I mean, I'm a total believer in incorporating a multi-industry approach. You know, lessons learned from other industries into the space sector, because often in the space sector, at least at the component level and the software practices level, it's lagging behind. For example, consumer electronics or other established industries. So yeah, this is fantastic. I'll also personally take a look at it. I mean, I'm nowhere close to systems engineering, but this seems very interesting. Thanks for that. So, what kind of tools or softwares or third party or other kind of softwares that you use on an everyday basis for systems engineering?
Yeah, so I'm a bit of a traditionalist when it comes to requirements management. So I use Doors Next Generation only for requirements gathering. So requirements gathering is a bit like searching for gold in a field. Good requirements are very hard to come by, so you need to really develop them. And I also train our group of systems engineers on Doors. But I am a self-proclaimed evangelist for a tool called Capella, that is a tool, a model-based systems engineering tool. And I'm a student of model-based systems engineering. I'm still learning it. I think I'm nowhere close to using it in production setting. But basically, just to give you a brief introduction, model-based systems engineering is less text-based requirements tracking and engineering, and it uses what um, what is legacy UML, Unified Modeling Language. So the semantics of a language to but to write requirements and to link them. So there was already SysML that came from UML in the history of uh, model-based systems engineering, and major proponents of this were in both in Asia in Toyota and in the US, many defense organizations and automotive industry as well. But then Thales in France had a division that was using SysML, but they used another context, and they called it Arcadia. So the founder of Arcadia uh, wrote wrote tried to write a better tool for model-based systems engineering, and the tool is called Capella, Capella, and that tool is basically an open source tool, which is built on top of Eclipse, serious Eclipse language, and so you basically write requirements maybe in a tool like Doors or um, anything else, Java. And then you import these requirements into a model-based systems engineering tool, for example, like Capella, and then you can do a different analysis of physical architectures, functional blockchains, where you define functions and functional relationships. Um, So what it does is it abstracts the level of system analysis or functional analysis that a system engineer has to do. And instead of this being in documents, it's in software. And it's hard to do it for systems engineering alone. Sorry, for a systems engineer alone, because the others have to use the same tool in order to understand the boundaries of their subsystem, or how their subsystem is functioning in general. So I think in Redwire Space right now, we do still use the legacy doors and documentation environment, but at the right time, I'm waiting for a small enough project and high enough risk to totally go to model-based systems engineering and completely digitalize engineering in Redwire.
Wow, that sounds
It's a long-term
pretty.
goal.
Yeah, yeah, it sounds very fascinating though. That sounds like almost a life goal, you know. There's a bunch of companies, right? A bunch of startups, at least based in Europe, like Valley Space, which also offer these requirements management and requirements mapping kind of services with their softwares. So, have you used any of these commercial solutions?
Yeah, I have, and that tool in particular I have. And as a serious systems engineer, I had my reservations. I don't like dumbing down things in the context when you're doing detailed design. I think Valley Space is great for non-engineers, non-system engineers, to view the systems or tools like Valley Space. But I think for serious systems engineers who need to know boundaries, interfaces, single points of failure of the system, or they need to do worst case analysis. Uh, Such tools fall short, and it's not that they're bad. I think they're trying to solve it for a different market. And I think as a systems engineer, you would really need to have as much visibility of the system as possible and to the highest amount of detail as possible. And the physics remains the same, but when you're trying to test something and something doesn't work, I think you'll fall back on a lot of these details. So I'm uh, I have tried many tools. I keep trying new tools, and I think Valley Space will probably someday also cater to serious systems engineers. But I think they're doing a great job for the outward, like the systems engineer to non-systems engineering interface. I think that they're doing very well and have been. I mean, both Marco and Louisa, they I know both of them, and I think they do great software and a lovely team, of course. Apart from that, I don't think I've used any other tools, but systems engineering in general is, I think, very trade-off oriented. And someday, if somebody makes a nice tool for that, I wouldn't be. uh, yeah, I would be spending more time. Uh, I think trying to do less PowerPoints and notes and texts.
What about your fellow systems engineers in the INCOSE community, in other industries other than space? Do they also build most things internally in their companies, or do they use any other kind of tools?
Yeah, I think it depends on the industry. So if you go to automotive, where there's a strict standard, right? Automotive, medical, defense, space, aerospace, they all are driven by a certain need of traceability. Well, I think aerospace still has the highest standard, but I think some of these tools started within these companies with the need of having that function or this function. For example, in automotive, you have a standard, um, uh, a standard for ECU testing, and those guys really needed a tool to track and assign traceability from testing back towards the requirements. And so there's a lot of tools that basically have automated that part of the job, or serialized that part of the job. So I think that is one aspect. The other is software. I think flight software, where code coverage is essential. It's almost a life and death situation sometimes. And then you have, auto-generated coding, like, MATLAB Simulink, Simulink Coder, HDL, where you have auto-generated code. And then you really need to have specialized tools integrated with. Uh, I mean, what I'm talking about is mostly based on verifications, on the verification side of systems engineering. But when it comes to requirements writing, I think software is using a lot of tools such as Jira, and Confluence. Today almost everything is on a CI/CD pipeline. So I think there's not a dearth of tools, but I think there's too many tools today, and there's so many subscriptions that I think it's great that GitHub, at least now, after being overtaken by Microsoft, somebody with that perspective has come up and said, I'll build you all these tools and systems. Why do you want to go outside? And I hope that they do a better job than Windows for sure.
Yeah, and finally, we started having like dedicated DevOps engineers on the teams to guide us through this whole CI/CD. Yeah, I guess everything in the space industry kind of boils down to the fact that we don't really have any standards. I mean, there are CCSDS, ECSS standards, yes, but nothing is as stringent as in the other industries, like you mentioned. The civil aviation or the aerospace, auto industry. So yeah, it's gonna be the wild west for a while. In a way, I also like it because that means there's no limits to your imagination, right? There's no limits to what you can accomplish. So
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it depends on if you're interacting with a customer who's from an institution. For example, if you have ISRO or NASA or ESA, then you got to use their playbook to do things, and otherwise physics is physics, but a verification is so human. Uh, Machine doesn't need to really tell you that it can work in all these conditions. It's you as an external entity that needs to prove it. So it's very fascinating that way. I think you're going to ask a question in this realm. I can see that question coming up, but AI will probably hit this industry very hard.
okay, you're reading my mind now. Yeah. So what's your take on the whole ChatGPT? Because now Valley Space, I mean, since we spoke about Valley Space, they've also incorporated ChatGPT into their tools, right?
Okay, I know I wasn't aware. That's very interesting.
I haven't used it though. I've just seen their
So you mean to write requirements, or
to elaborate. So I just saw a small demo. I mean, I'm not part of the systems engineering team. I just subscribed to their newsletter. So
okay, yeah. But as it's like a language learning model, I think there is great scope in just of like being very specific about um, the conciseness, like the requirements of a requirement, the meta requirements. So how do you write requirements? How precise? The shall, the should, the will. Um, I think it will negatively impact the industry, in my opinion. My forecast is that I think there's still an element of engineering that is still core human, because when you're discussing a project, you still need to an engineer to understand and convert the requirement from function to physics. And that I think a language learning model cannot do, but it will write good homework for you. For example, it's a nice way of presenting. I think the cornerstone of this area or this discipline is when we will leave text finally. I think requirements writing is text only because humans need to read it. So in that way, I'm actually more AI friendly, where AI should be able to link objects to other objects, um, that not completely, say, vanish the need for writing of textual requirements, but reduce the amount of textual requirements that exist today. And I think that's what also Valley Space did with these budgets. They removed the need for writing these, so they just became conditions greater than, less than, equal to, and that's really good. Um, I I know a few people in Nkosi who are also leaning that way, and some who are not. But I think we need less text than more text to make better software and hardware both. And it's just the aspect of somebody who wants to read requirements that you write them in a certain way, from the fear of being misinterpreted. So that's my take.
No, that's very interesting. Yeah, because I've tried, of course, like everybody else, I've tried using ChatGPT to solve some coding problems, but yeah, I mean, totally agree. It's a very personalized Google search or a search engine, but it's a bit away because, or at least in the space industry, right? Like especially if you ask it to come up with some driver, help you with some driver code, it references a lot of these data sheets, and data sheets again are not standardized at all. Yeah, of course, as a systems engineer, I'm sure you've seen your share of data sheets, and that's a completely different nightmare. So, yeah, I also feel it's quite some time away before we can actually incorporate ChatGPT confidently and then just take decisions based on its output. You definitely need some sort of human who actually knows the subject matter to again verify what it says, and
Exactly.
that's a lot of systems engineering discussion. It's been fun. If space enthusiasts or young professionals want to reach out to you, what's the best way to do so?
The best way would be currently LinkedIn, I would say. Um, I fairly respond quickly if I'm not in the sprint for a review, or attending a conference or flying, somewhere or on a holiday. But yeah, and not that I'm huge on social media, but I think that's the best connectivity right now because email is still a very personalized thing to give away. Yeah, but otherwise, I mean, LinkedIn or your profile online, my presence online is fairly normal, and they can also reach out to my work email that's on the website.
Wow, yeah. Yeah, it's been a very, very insightful discussion, Vinayak. You've shared a lot of very fine, very minute details into systems engineering. So now I have a lot of respect for all the systems engineering engineers in my team. I'm going to bother them.
I hope I didn't spoil the name.
No, not at all. But it's always fascinating to know what really goes on, what are the challenges of your fellow engineers. Yeah, it's been very insightful. Thanks for that.
No, thank you for having me, Rachna. And I listened to a few podcasts, and yeah, very fascinating, great questions. I hope you get keep getting interesting guests. And I just wanted to say something on the lines of I think the more non-space people, like general people, that your podcast can reach out to, I think the more this industry, like our industry, will benefit. It's not geeks like us who, have known about space since childhood, but those who have learned and then, have taken an interest. So, uh, yeah, thanks for having the podcast as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you also find it useful. That's exactly the reason I started this podcast in the first place. because if you know, go by the name, right? It's called Those Space People. So it's kind of trying to provide a perspective on the diverse roles people in the space value chain assume, to give a perspective to people outside of it. Because people outside the space industry, they just look at the rockets. You're either an astronaut or
Yeah.
someone designing rockets, and that's about it. Yeah, I also try to keep it at a very, I mean, sometimes it goes into a lot of details. Of course, when two space people are talking, we kind
Yeah.
of,
Can't help it.
yeah, that happens. But yeah, I try to keep it as simple as possible so everyone can follow. But this has been very, very interesting. Thanks again.
No worries. My pleasure.